70 years ago, Lionel Fanthorpe's first story, Worlds Without End, was first published. It was a short science fiction tale which appeared in Futuristic Science Stories, Volume 6. That was the start to a prolific writing career, which to date has seen Lionel pen hundreds of books. He has been given the accolade of probably one of the most prolific science fiction writers in the world. But there is so much more to this remarkable man. Not only has Lionel written hundreds of sci-fi stories, but together with his wife of 64 years, Patricia, has written books on an array of different subjects, including the paranormal, the unexplained mysteries of the world, poetry, and religion. Indeed, Lionel can be likened to a modern-day Indiana Jones, as over the years he's travelled the world in search of the unexplained. You would think that his writing and travels would be a full-time career, but not for Lionel. He has presented a number of television series, including 22 episodes of the cult Channel 4 show 14 TV, The Real Nostradamus, Castles of Horror, Talking Stones, The Omen Prophecy Fulfilled, Bloodline, The Unexplained with George Norrie, and Forbidden History. Lionel has been described as the leather jacket wearing, Harley Davidson riding, paranormal investigating vicar. Now that's some accolade. And yet, there is so much more to this fascinating man. He is a major contributor to paranormal research, a former teacher and head teacher, an army rock climbing instructor, and a World Judo Association black belt 5th Dan. I have been given the great honour to interview Lionel for this documentary. He's been recovering from a recent illness, but now, at 87 years of age, he is still writing and working on a number of creative projects. I joined him in the garden of his home in the city of Cardiff. Lionel, thank you so much for inviting me to your lovely home. I have so many questions, it's rather difficult to know where to begin. But however, maybe we can start 70 years ago when it all began with the publication of your first story. How and why did you start writing science fiction?
Well, it goes back a little bit earlier than that to when I was at school, and I detested lessons like algebra and Latin and things that I found difficult. So I used to go and hide in the school library. And the petition behind which I hid, there were books on that library shelf, some by H.G. Wells, some by Jules Verne, and some by other fantasy writers and science fiction writers. And while I was avoiding the algebra and Latin that I didn't want, I would read H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, your Journey to the Centre of the Earth and Round the World in 80 Days, so that my real interest in science fiction began with those classical writers. And then by the time I was, let's just see, was in 52 when I was 17, I was reading science fiction again, and I thought, I could do something like this. I like these ideas. So as a basic answer, I'd say by reading the science fiction that others had written, sort of stimulated the ideas. And my other great interests at that time were in theology and philosophy, and in what the world was all about. Why are we here? What is the universe? And if we think about this latest news item of those magnificent pictures they've taken on this superb camera that goes right across the galaxy and beyond, way beyond the galaxy, I was trying to solve the problem deep in my subconscious of what is this universe we live in? What are we here for? And how can we make the best of it? And that's where it all began.
Brilliant, thank you. Your first published story was Worlds Without End. Where did the initial idea come from?
Well, continuing from what I said about philosophy and theology that interested me very much. I started off with the idea, and I was trying to think my way through whether the universe was the creation of God or whether it was just something that had occurred naturally. And I had a hero who was going through the problems that I was going through at that almost subconscious level as to, is there a God? If so, is this his creation? If there isn't a God, is it just something natural that sprang into existence on its own? So I had the captain of the ship, who was a devout believer, being sent out to see whether the universe had an end, whether he would fly into the end, the edge, the boundary of the universe, and of course be killed in the process, or whether there was no limit. And in both cases, he was on a loser. If there was a limit and he hit it, he's dead. If there is no limit, then his religious faith is wasted because there was no God to have created it. There's no limit. It's just a natural phenomenon. And the main part of the story, these thoughts going through his mind, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to hit the edge or? And then a gigantic and very benign and infinitely powerful hand comes out of nothingness, takes his ship, gently turns it round and says, I am here, I did make it, now go home and enjoy yourself. And that's the plot.
What or who were your influences?
Well, I would think that when you're a teenager who cares about the world and about life, you talk it over with your teenage friends in school or down at the youth club, and by the time you've finished having a drink and having a dance and enjoying the music, you may have 5 minutes to talk about what is this universe we're in. And I would say it was the thoughts of other young men and women growing up and talking to each other and to me about who am I, what am I here for, what is this universe that we're in. And that was one of the major reasons for my thoughts about it. And then because you couldn't, as a teenager with a very low salary, you couldn't go far or do anything in reality, we would go to places in our minds and say, well, let's just imagine what it's like on Mars or on Jupiter, or let's just imagine what it's like if we go beyond the other stars that we can see. What is in this universe with us? And those were the influences.
I understand you had a very unique way of working, which included bed covers and reel-to-reel tape recorder.
Yeah,
How did the process work?
when you ask a question, it takes my mind right back to it. And so I'd sort of come in from a day at work. And I'm now sort of like 15, 16, 17. And I want to get to one of these science fiction worlds. I want to get into a paranormal environment. I want to shut out the real environment. And so what I would do to try and insulate myself from reality was to get under the bedclothes, pull them right over me so I'm sort of wrapped in them. We didn't have duvets in those days. So you just got under the blankets and you said to yourself, now, I am on Mars, or I'm on Jupiter, or I'm flying between the galaxies. And I then told the story as if I was the sort of equivalent in the 50s and 60s of a Greek storyteller entertaining the villagers as he goes from one to the other. And I just told the story to my very old-fashioned reel-to-reel tape recorder, which, just to digress from that for a moment, is now very proud to have been asked to lend some objects that relate to my writing career to the Metropolitan University here in Cardiff. And so there's an archive in the Met with my old tape recorder on it that I used back in the 60s and 70s and in the 50s. Yeah. And I think it would still work. I don't know whether the tape I gave them has a story on it, but it may or may not. But it's all there if anybody wants to go and have a look at the archive.
And this activity was in Norfolk, I
Yep.
believe.
Yeah, I was born in Norfolk. My mother's family came from Barnard Castle up in Durham, and mother had got a job in a little, she was just a teenager, and had got a job in a local tobacconist's plus general items shop. And the proprietor, my dad, who was to be, had recently lost his wife after nearly 50 years of marriage. And he's got this attractive teenage girl who's just come to work for him and proposes to her. And within a matter of weeks of Mum getting the job as a teenager in Dad's shop, lo and behold, they are married, and the shop is in Norfolk, their house is in Norfolk, so I was born in Norfolk.
How many books did you complete each month?
Little difficult to answer with the accuracy the question deserves. The company who bought most of them were John Spencer and Company, who did Badger Books. And they produced 6 or 8 or 10 every month. And they would do westerns, hospital romances, and science fiction, ghost stories, horror stories, paranormal. And when they commissioned me as one of their writers, we would sometimes get a book done every week. So we were doing 4 a month, sometimes 5 a month. If they really got agitated, they'd say, "Can you possibly do this by Friday?" And it's now Wednesday. So you sit up all night recording it, recording into the old-fashioned reel-to-reel recorder, and had a team of lovely helpers, Patricia being one of them, and my mother had been a shorthand and typing teacher, so she was a very good audio typist herself, and we had a group of other friends who were audio typists, and I'd rush a reel off to one of them and they'd get it. Now that also had an interesting effect in that it accounted for the galloping endings, I sometimes got. Because when you're dictating, if the ideas are running and you're speaking fast, you're doing far more words than you think you're doing. And the publisher wanted 50,000 words in the book. Now, one of my typists, the one who'd had the most recent reel, would phone and say, "Lionel, I'm up to 49,000. So I think, wow, I've only got 2,000 to do, and I've got so many characters still in dangerous situations. I've got so many unresolved mysteries. And this used to account for the galloping consumption ending. I'd have to try and finish off what I'd intended to be 40 or 50 pages, had to be squeezed down into about 3. So that if you look through any of those old manuscripts that I completed back in the 50s and 60s, it's not difficult to find the galloping consumption ending.
You wrote under a number of pen names. Why was this?
Well, the publisher wanted to use a number of short stories in the same collection, and he couldn't put by Lionel Fanthorpe, by Lionel Fanthorpe, by Lionel, all the way through. So I had to find some pen names. And what I wanted to do was to be able to prove that the pen name was me. So I used extractive anagrams, and I came up with a list including Pel Toro, Othello Baron, Earl Barton and his brother Lee Barton, Thornton Bell, which was one I rather liked, and then Bron Fane and Oben Lurteth, who sounds as if he's a Martian, and then Trebor Thorpe, Neil Thanet and Olaf Trent. And they came up time and time again on the collections of short stories.
Who were your main competitors in the science fiction genre at the time?
Well, at the time when we were doing so many, there were some very famous names around there. There was Ray Bradbury. Remember, he's the guy who wrote Fahrenheit 451. There was Isaac Asimov, who always wrote about robots. There was Robert Heinlein, who did Starship Troopers. And, of course, Arthur C. Clarke with Childhood's End. Then on into the 60s, there was Frank Herbert, who did Dune, which is now flourishing again. There was Kurt Vonnegut, who did Slaughterhouse-Five. And, of course, one of the most talented of all time was Ursula K. Le Guin, who was famous for The Left Hand of Darkness. And unforgettable was Harry Harrison, who was the author of The Stainless Steel Rat and other rat stories.
You say that you did the majority of your writing during the evenings. So, what work were you doing during the day, and did it influence your creativity in any way?
Well, during the day, I started illegally, as I've done many things, as a dental technician. And I was doing an apprenticeship with this dentist. And way back before the First World War, anybody could be a dentist. You could just register as a dentist and set up a little surgery, and away you go, and heaven help your patients. And I was working for this old registered dentist and making false teeth. And it's so long ago that the false teeth were then made on a base of vulcanite instead of the modern plastic style. So there I was with a vulcanizer, and the guy I worked with was an ex-army dental technician, and a very nice bloke, got on very well, and he was very helpful. But he always used to send me to the vulcanizer, which was the far end of the laboratory. And I said to him one day, Alan, why do you want me to turn off and then empty the vulcanizer? And he said, well, when I was in the dental corps serving in North Africa, one of those blew up. And if you could imagine, they're about the size of a big flower pot, just over 18 inches. And they're made of very thick steel shaft with a lid on the top, which probably about the size of a discus as used in sports. And he was, as I said, working in North Africa, and they had to use any fuel they could get hold of. And this vulcanizer got overheated and exploded. And this disc went up in the air over 100 feet, like a cannon firing a ball, except that it was a disc. And the dental surgeon, he said he always had enormous gratitude to the bloke, because instead of running for cover, he knew that Alan was in grave danger, and he rushed out from the dental service hut, flung his arms round Alan's shoulders and flung them both to the ground into the sand, and said, "Just pray hard, boy." And he said the lid of this vulcanizer landed about 3 yards away from them. If it had hit either of them on the way down, you'd lose the top of your head. Very unlikely to make any more false teeth. But that was my first job with Alan Thacker. And the dentist we worked for was a guy called Charter Start. I got rather tired of this because I was on apprentice wages, which was very small. And I learned that friends who'd been at school with me were working in a factory for about £3 a week, where I was getting, in the equivalent of modern money, 50 pence a week. And I thought, no, I'm not doing any more of this. So I went to work in the factory, which I did for a few weeks. Then I heard another of my friends who'd been in class with me when we were at school had got a job on a farm where they were paying more, surprisingly, than you could get working in a factory. In the factory, which was called Metamex, we were making Metamec clocks. And I thought, I don't mind, I'll go and work on the farm. So I got the job on the farm. And then I found that that was rather heavier work than I thought it was going to be. So I left, went back to my father's shop, and father had a saloon upstairs where we had two ladies doing ladies' hairdressing, and we had one very old-fashioned short back and sides gents hairdresser. So I got taught how to do army haircuts, short back and sides, with the electronic buzzers. And when I'd had enough of that, I was lucky enough to find an advert for an apprentice journalist in Fakenham, which was only 12 miles away. I got the job as a journalist, trainee, and then my good luck continued, because the man in charge of our Cromer office, which incorporated the town of Sheringham and Cromer on the North Norfolk coast, he got a better job on one of the big national papers, whereas ours was only a weekly, rural weekly. And they promoted me after just a few weeks as an apprentice to take charge of the Cromer office and the Sheringham office. And I felt very proud of myself, and I went off and took charge. And I was a journalist and greatly enjoying it. And that was most of the other jobs that I did. And then I'm trying to think, carried on with the writing mainly, and don't think I can remember what I did after I gave up the journalism. But a number of interesting little jobs that kept me from poverty, shall we say.
Writing so many stories, I'm interested to learn where all your ideas come from.
Well, it's very difficult to know, I think, accurately at the deepest levels of our thoughts where our ideas do come from. It can be, using a simple example, if I'm looking at that rather unusual little tree over there, and I don't know if we can get a shot of that, the one with the little green sprouty bits right next to you, that came to us by mistake by a friend who'd gone out to buy a Christmas tree for us. And because his background was not British, he couldn't tell that from a proper fir tree. So he brought us that. And we said, that's very nice, thank you. Now, sitting here looking at it as we make the broadcast, I imagine a science fiction story in which you have a tree that is not a tree, but has a mind and has the ability to maneuver its branches. So it's like an orc in some of the famous tales where you have these living trees. And that could give me an idea, just sitting here doing our interview, looking across the other side of my garden and thinking, oh yes, suppose that tree contained a spirit, contained a mind. Suppose it was even extraterrestrial, that he'd come to, I couldn't remember where he came from, but I came down one morning, there he was, sitting in a flower pot. And to my great surprise, he started talking to me. So that just as an example of one thing, just looking at a tree or a plant. The other things that I got very interested in was the kind of alternative events in history that if something hadn't happened or something had happened that didn't, how different would our history be together from what our real life is? And one or two I've done on those lines is that Julius Caesar was rather suspicious of Brutus and his other so-called friends. And so he tucks his short sword under his toga when he goes out to meet them. And as soon as he sees Brutus's dagger flash, his sword is out 3 times the length and strength of the dagger. And not only does the dagger go down, but Brutus's left arm goes down with it. And then Caesar cuts his throat as he falls. The other 3 run for their lives. Caesar remains the ruler of Rome for the next 50 years, which makes a very different history because the Roman Empire doesn't collapse. We are now under the reign of Queen Cleopatra the 25th, who was the great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter of the one who married Caesar. So you could take events which, had they been different, life would have been different. So you write about the difference that would have occurred if, as we use Julius Caesar as an example. And another one that I used was Joan of Arc. Had she not been killed as she was, what would the world have been like under her leadership? And various very able and important figures like her or Caesar, and imagine what the world. So there's another source of ideas going into history and saying, what if? And the other possibilities are that you ask yourself whether, had there been another race, if we take the Neanderthals and say, had the Neanderthals not died out, what would we be like today if we had direct Neanderthal ancestors? So I think if we tried to generalize that, we might say something like, the idea for science fiction and fantasy comes from asking the one basic question, what if? And then going on to develop it as if the if had happened.
Moving forward a bit now, perhaps you are best known as an investigator of world mysteries, the unexplained and the paranormal. Were you interested in these subjects when you were at the height of your sci-fi writing?
Oh yes, very much. In fact, it really goes back all the way to my school days when, as I was saying earlier, in the school library I was reading Tales of the Unexpected by H.G. Wells. And I was, from the age of 12 or 13, I was fascinated by the real meaning of the universe and what might have happened if this had or had not occurred. So I was interested in real life mysteries long before I ever put pen to paper or fingers to keys to write science fiction. That the real interest lay in, if this thing does not conform to normal life patterns, if, going back to that little Christmas tree type over there, what if he really was an intelligent visitor from another planet? And I began wondering, when I came across real life unsolved mysteries, that that and the science fiction wove into each other. I think I could say that the existence of real life unsolved mysteries prompted the science fiction.
Now, you have travelled the world investigating the unexplained. What are the most mysterious places you've visited, and what do you consider to be the strangest mystery?
Well, my interest in unsolved mysteries and strange things from all around the world was greatly reinforced by my lovely Patricia, who was just as interested in them as I am, and we always went everywhere together. And one of the strangest places we went to was in Barbados, where the tale is usually known, if you look it up on the internet, as the creeping coffins of Barbados. And this tomb belonged to the Chase family, and every time a member of the Chase family died and were brought down in the new coffin into this Chase vault, which was a very deep and mysterious structure, the other coffins had moved. And when we went to visit it, we were fascinated by the place. In fact, so fascinated that I picked up one of the stones on the floor over which these coffins had moved, put it in my pocket, didn't say anything to the customs officer when I got home, and this is it. That is from the floor of the Chase vault where the coffins moved. Put it back in my pocket, but I don't expect to be pushed off the bench. And nobody knows what caused those coffins to move, whether there were minor earth tremors. But the vault was sealed. The biggest of the coffins weighed a ton. It was a great big lead-lined thing. It would have taken half a dozen of us to lift it. And so that remains as a very strange mystery. And I wonder whether, if sometime in the future, as science develops and progresses, if some scientific experiments could be carried out in the Chase Vault in Barbados, whether there is some unknown power in there, some unknown force that hasn't yet come under the control of our contemporary scientists. And if we could find it and use it, it might be as big a difference as the discovery of electric power or, any modern force. So that I'd put right at the top of the list, but we have seen one or two others. Another very interesting mystery, which again has never been solved, was Oak Island, just off the coast of Nova Scotia. And going back 100 years and more, 3 teenage lads thought they'd have a jaunt out to Oak Island, and they were the ones who really got the mystery started, because in their time there were pirates everywhere, and most teenage boys wanted to find a place either on a beach or near the beach where the pirates had come ashore, buried enough treasure to live on for the rest of your life. And these 3 lads were hoping that some pirates had delivered things to Oak Island which they'd hidden there. And when they got there, they found quite clearly where the earth had been dug up, and they started digging, thinking, oh, just a few feet down we'll find where they put the treasure chest. And they didn't. What they found was the top of a shaft which went down for well over 100 feet. And it had little wooden platforms about every 8 or 10 feet all the way down. Somebody, for some reason which none of us have ever known, had dug that shaft at perhaps 500 years ago, perhaps 1,000 years ago. And these 3 lads could not imagine anybody going to all that trouble and work and not using it to safeguard something of enormous value. And when Patricia and I went out there to explore it firsthand, to write it up in one of our books, we met Dan Blankenship. Dan had been pretty well a millionaire and had then sold his business and everything else in order to spend the rest of his life on Oak Island trying to solve the mystery of this shaft. It has never been solved, and despite our very best efforts, we didn't come up with a chest of pirate gold. And so the centre of the mystery of Oak Island is who dug the shaft, why did they do it, and what's in it? So that remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the earth.
I know you've written dozens of books on the unexplained and have presented several television series, including 14 TV and Castles of Horror. Do you have any funny anecdotes you can share with us from your presenting days?
Well, the one that comes to my mind first, we were off overseas, and I'm not sure exactly where this castle was, but I rather suspect we were in Portugal. And the director was trying to get something sensational and exciting into it. And we found this mound with the remains of a medieval castle on top of it, and a footpath apparently going round the base of it. And he had rented from a local motorbike hire shop. I hadn't taken my bike over there. And he was explaining to me that he wanted me to go round this footpath, which went all the way round this allegedly haunted castle, and he wanted me to go as fast as possible. So I said, yeah, fine, I don't mind. And I was getting up to 50 or 60, and he was shouting, go faster, go faster. So I opened it up to the maximum it would do. It wasn't a very fast bike, so 75, 80 was all it would do. And I was going around this path, and I kept going past a notice board which had French, Spanish, Portuguese, and at the bottom, in rather smaller letters, because there must have been fewer English visitors, a notice in English, which I couldn't read because I was going past it too fast. And when he finally waves to me and says, that's good, that's very good, that's lovely, thank you, I got off the bike and looked at the bottom notice, and it said, extreme danger, unfenced cliff edge. So I parked the bike and walked very carefully to the edge, and there was upwards of 100-foot drop, actually straight over, and I'd been about as far as I was from the camera. So I have to thank Providence that I'm here to tell the tale, and I can see the funny side of it as well. We were doing some shots in Soho, and I think again this was 4T TV, and the director had decided that he wanted to do a piece of historical throwback, and Elvis Presley visiting Soho. I don't know if he ever did or not, but my director had got it into his head that dressing me up as Elvis Presley in a typical Elvis outfit and having me saunter around Soho would be likely to have some interesting results. Well, it did. All the young working ladies who were in the upper flats were shouting down and offering Elvis a price cut if he'd like to come up and see them. And yes, I remember that particularly. I thought, I wonder what the real Elvis would have done if he'd been in this situation.
You are an ordained priest. I understand this calling came to you later in life. What were the circumstances?
Well, ever since my teens, I'd been interested, very interested, in finding out what life was all about. As I said in that very first story that I sold, the idea of does the universe have an end? Is there a God who made a universe? And these thoughts filled my mind from my teens onwards. And eventually I got to the point where, if you could imagine having your mind full of philosophical questions and theological questions, and there comes a point when you're weighing up these questions and, how did the universe come into existence? Is there a God? And so on and so on. And what is our mission in life, if there is such a thing? That I came to the conclusion that there is a God who is all-powerful and totally benign, and that the best thing we can do with our lives is to serve him in the way that he would approve of most, which is in being kind and gentle and helpful to other people who are his creatures, so that all of us as human beings should do everything we can to help each other and to be kind to each other, because that is, as I believe, the will of God. And I thought, well, if I became an ordained priest, if I trained for ordination, then I would have more opportunity to help people who had big troubles. I could just illustrate that, perhaps with one case of the sort of thing that I wanted to do. I was walking home one day, and this is over in the last 15 or 20 years, and a very frightened and disturbed man rushed out of his front door, grabbed me by the sleeve, I'd got my dog collar on, and said, "Are you a priest?" I said, "Yes, I am a priest. Could you come and help me?" So I said, "Of course I will, that's what we're for." So I went in with him, and he told me the story that was troubling him so much. He had recently lost his wife. He'd been her second husband. She had grown-up children by her first marriage, for whom, before she died, she had put money away for him to give to her children from the first marriage after she died. And he said, "Oh, Father, I didn't do what she asked. I've kept the money for myself." He said, what shall I do? He said, I keep seeing her ghost. It's terrible. She's everywhere with me. And I said, well, my recommendation would be that you first of all do what you promised her you do and give the money to her children. And then we can go off to, you know where she's buried. We'll go over to the grave and I'll say a prayer of peace for her. And we did that. And I saw him again a few days after I'd done the prayer over her grave, and the money had gone to the children who were entitled to it. And he looked at me, the expression on his face was just wonderful. Thank you, Father. She is not coming anymore. She does not visit the house anymore. You have saved me. I was going mad with it. And I thought, well, this is the sort of thing that is so worth doing. You've changed another human being's life for the better. And whether or not it was a real ghost or whether it was just his feeling of guilt at having stolen the money that she wanted her children to have. But that's, shall we say, one of the things that I think justifies calling to the priesthood and trying to do the best you can for the brothers and sisters around you.
Do you find any conflict arising at times between being a man of faith and your interest in the paranormal?
No, I would say it's almost exactly the opposite, because it was my interest in the paranormal from my very earliest teens until my thinking process is now at 87, that the idea of goodness and of godliness and of the way that life ought to be lived, if we can do the most and best we can, is all part of the whole life process, so that I don't find the idea of investigating the paranormal. It's all, I look at it this way, it's all God's world, and I, as one of God's priests, and though I work independently now, I was with the church in Wales for many years, but I know, as I said, practice independently, that it is the work of a priest to do his best to help people in all circumstances. And in some circumstances, people are troubled by the paranormal. So I think by taking an interest in the paranormal, by studying the supernatural, there's no conflict with priesthood. It's just an area for the mind and spirit to explore, in the hope that you can use that knowledge to help people like that poor man who felt guilty about not giving his wife's money to the children.
Religion and the paranormal perhaps have a crossover when it comes to hauntings and in particular poltergeist activity. I understand you've performed a number of exorcisms. Can you explain what these entail and provide a few examples of hauntings you have experienced?
Well, the general outline of an exorcism is that you are driving something out. This is the basic meaning of the word. And it goes back to medieval times, the very early church, where the priest or the bishop, if it was considered as serious as requiring the services of a bishop, would visit the premises, or if it wasn't the premises that were haunted, would visit the person who was being plagued by some supernatural thing, and would attempt to drive out the evil forces. The general meaning behind exorcism from those early days was that you are driving out a demon or an evil spirit or some sort of unwelcome black entity, and that you are, in the course of the driving out, you are cleansing the person, or you're cleansing the building where these alleged hauntings are taking place, so that the words that would be used would mainly call upon the power of God and the holy angels to drive out the force of evil that was in the area or in the person, plaguing the person, and that you would use a Bible reading, and you'd have a Bible in your hand or a Bible close by, and you would also have holy water, which has been blessed and made into holy water, and this would be sprinkled into various areas of the building, or would be sprinkled onto the person who was afflicted by whatever was causing the haunting of that man or woman. Now, I can recall one particular case, and this involved the rather unusual sight of the Odeon Cinema in Bristol. And with the encouragement of the cinema manager, one of his ushers had come to see me to say that he didn't want to give up work because he was very happy there. It was a very good staff team in the Bristol Odeon, and the manager was particularly kind and protective of him. But there was one small area towards one of the exit doors where he felt that there were dark forces, evil forces, call them demons for want of a better name, and he was terrified to use that little exit corridor. And having spoken to the cinema manager, who was perfectly happy for me to do it, to help this member of staff whom he liked very much and didn't want him to leave, so I went down with holy water and sprinkled this particular corridor with holy water, and carried a Bible into the area, and also said the prayers of exorcism as though we were back in the Middle Ages, and I was telling whatever naughty spirit had got in there that he'd got to get out. And I was delighted that, and again, of course, we would look for psychological explanation as well. Delighted that it was cured, and that the young man was able to resume his job in the Bristol Odeon, and he and the manager were very, very happy with what we'd achieved. Now, of course, looking at it psychologically, if that young man had believed in evil spirits, if he had also believed that an exorcism could get rid of them, then the two things went together, and I performed an exorcism and sprinkled holy water and carried the Bible in the traditional way. And he then, at subconscious level, thought, oh, it's been cleaned, I'm all right now, I can go back to work. So that one could look for psychological explanation as well as looking at a psychic explanation. Another of these strange experiences that I had concerned some children that I'd been teaching, and the parents came to see me to say that the children were very frightened at home because they thought there was a ghost there, that the house was haunted, and would I go and exorcise the house for them to protect the children? So I said, yeah, of course, I was delighted to. So I went round to the house, and it didn't feel abnormal in any way, it was just an ordinary sort of Cardiff townhouse, and I performed exorcism services in each of the rooms and sprinkled holy water in the normal way, read from the Bible in the normal way in an exorcism service. And then, although it had improved, they told me about a week later that there was still something there and the children were still disturbed. And I had a psychic friend who was what one would call a medium, I think, for want of a better title, very spiritually alert and aware. And she said that she would come and see if she could help me. So she came along with me, and she said, because she had this very great spiritual psychic awareness, a little girl died in this house when she was only 6 or 7, but that was in Victorian times, and she's been in the house ever since. The ghost has not moved on. It's been afraid to move on. And I watched as she spoke to what to me was an empty room, telling this little girl there was nothing to be frightened of, and that there was a wonderful spiritual world where she would see her parents again and all her friends, and would live forever in great happiness if she just took the courage to move on. And then my psychic friend, the medium, turns to me and said, Father, she's gone. So I said, right. And after that, the children had no further trouble. Now, I can't explain it other than, was it really a psychic force in the house, the ghost of this poor little girl who died in Victorian times? And was my medium friend, who was so spiritually aware, was she telling this little girl how nice it is if she goes on to the heavenly pastures? I can't explain it, but it was very strange. The children, my students, had no further trouble after the medium had told the little ghost to go on to a better place. Just one of the mysteries.
Returning for a moment to your science fiction writing, I understand you've recently lent your archive to the Cardiff Metropolitan University. What is in it in the collection, and can it be viewed by the public?
Yes, as far as I know, when the Metropolitan University opens an archive, and this is in their huge central library that they've done it, and the archives are open to anyone who like. It may be a good idea just to phone up and ask, are they open on a particular day, or will there be an assistant librarian who could show me round it? And yes, as far as I know, they're open to the public, and the more people who see them, the happier I shall be. As there's my dear old tape recorder there, we're going back to the 50s and 60s, with its two massive reels clanking across the sound head. And yes, it's a great honour to be asked to prepare an archive for them and to let them have some of our early books. And but as I said, they're strictly on loan, and when I eventually go and find the answer to all the mysteries, let's hope the archive will send all my things back.
What projects have you recently been working on?
Well, I've done a collection of paranormal stories. I've tried to include in there all kinds of the characters, if you could call them that, of the paranormal, from ghost stories and horror stories. So you've got zombies and werewolves and all kinds of other nasty creatures. And I've also worked on some alternate history stories, which I'm very interested in. I love to think about those. And then I'm currently working on some short horror stories, ghost stories, paranormal stories, which I'm looking forward very much to reading and putting in the archive and putting on my website, so that anybody who likes to listen rather than read for themselves in the old-fashioned way will be able to get to those. So it's the order book is still happily full. Lovely to know that you're still wanted at 87.
And do you have any further projects in the pipeline?
Yes, the most important one, I think, is the one that I want to do, in which I combine the philosophy and the theology. I want to do a serious piece of totally non-fiction about what the universe is, what a human being's place in the universe is, and how it started. Is it going to end? So I want to bring together the philosophy and theology that have lived with me all my thinking life, and put that into one set of, almost as we've been doing, a set of questions and answers, except that I will be asking myself instead of you asking me, which is, I greatly regret. I'd rather you did the asking.
I know I'm speaking to one of the world's most prolific science fiction writers. Does writing keep your mind fresh and with the greatest respect? Most people your age are happy to take it easy.
Well, I love writing, and I have loved writing, creating, since my teens. And I don't think I would ever reach a point, at least I'm only 87, I'm still a youngster. Don't think I'm likely to reach a point at which I won't want to do it. You pick up occasional news items about a long-standing author, and he or she is still writing at age 100 plus and is still writing good stuff. So I'm saying to myself, I want to do that. I don't want to relax. I want to work.
Moving away from your books and television series, given your line of work, you must have experienced some strange occurrences yourself.
Yes, we were exploring the catacombs in Rome. And in this particular one, I had moved away. Patricia was with the main party who was being led round by the tourist guide. And I, being me, had slunk off in another direction where the guide couldn't say, "Oi, where are you going?" And I was looking at the various tombs that were down there in the catacombs. And a hand came out of nowhere and reached out and rested gently on my shoulder. I thought, uh-oh, is this another of the guides or one of the security men? Am I going to get thrown out? Or if I decide to hit him, have I got enough excuse because he put his hand on me first? And I thought, no, I'll take it easy. And I turned round, and there was the most amazing sight, I think, in all our years of exploration I'd ever seen. If you could imagine a triangular cape going up above your head into a cone-shaped hat, like the traditional witches wear in the illustrations. And then it didn't stop at the shoulders, it went on down. So the cone on the head continued all the way down to waist level, where it stopped. And then another cone sprang out from the sides of this one and went right down to my feet. And the feeling that I got was that I was being blessed by this hand. It was in the least hostile, and discovered afterwards that there was a Saint Calixtus who had blessed visitors to the catacombs at that point and was himself buried in the catacombs. So I would say that's about the strangest of all the experiences I've ever had. What that figure was, I don't know, but it was totally benign, totally friendly, wishing me well and blessing me. And then it just faded away. Could it have been St. Calixtus? I don't know.
Lionel, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you on behalf of all of the viewers for entertaining us and your remarkable anecdotes. Now, come on, Vicar, let's go get another cup of tea and some cake.
A cup of tea and cake would be ideal.